The winds of change swept through the dusty streets of Sweetwater Creek, Colorado, in the late summer of 1876 when Willow Jameson stepped off the stagecoach, her face partially concealed by a modest bonnet, her eyes scanning the unfamiliar town that would either be her salvation or her undoing. Behind her stretched a past filled with whispers and judgment, but ahead lay a future she desperately hoped would be different from the one she'd fled. Willow adjusted her faded blue calico dress, smoothed down the creases formed during the long journey from St. Louis, and took a deep breath of the mountain air. At 22, she carried herself with a dignity that belied her circumstances, though the weight of her past bent her shoulders slightly when she thought no one was looking. Sweetwater Creek, she murmured to herself, tasting the words on her lips. A place for new beginnings. The stagecoach driver tossed down her single trunk, sending a small cloud of dust billowing up from the street. "That's it for Sweetwater Creek, folks," he called out. "We'll be moving on at dawn tomorrow for those continuing west." Willow thanked him with a nod and looked around. The town was larger than she'd expected, a main street lined with establishments ranging from the necessary to the notorious. A general store, a small church, the sheriff's office, a bank, and at the far end, a saloon with piano music spilling out its swinging doors even at this early hour. She had come west on the promise of employment from her late mother's cousin, Eliza Matthews, who owned the town's only proper boarding house. The letter had arrived 3 months ago, offering Willow a position as a housekeeper and cook and, more importantly, a chance to leave behind the rumors that had made her life in St. Louis unbearable. "Miss Jameson," a voice called out, and Willow turned to see a plump, gray-haired woman approaching. "I'm Eliza Matthews. I'd recognize you anywhere you have your mother's eyes." "Mrs. Matthews." Willow extended her hand gratefully. "Thank you for meeting me. Let's get you settled," Eliza said, her keen eyes taking in Willow's travel-worn appearance. "You must be exhausted." It's not a short journey from Missouri. As they walked toward the boarding house, Willow felt the stares of the townspeople. Some curious, some friendly, but others held that familiar edge of suspicion that had followed her for the past year. News traveled fast, even across such distances, and Willow wondered how much time she would have before her past caught up with her. The Matthews boarding house stood 3 stories tall, its white paint weathered but well-maintained. Inside, the smell of pine soap and baking bread created an immediate sense of home that Willow hadn't felt in months. "Your room is on the 2nd floor," Eliza explained, leading the way up the stairs. "Small but private. The work isn't difficult, cleaning the common areas, helping with meals, and keeping the ledgers in order. I'm not as young as I once was." The room was indeed small but contained a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin, a small writing desk, and a window that overlooked the main street. "It's perfect," Willow said softly, setting down her reticule on the bed. Eliza patted her hand. "Rest today. Tomorrow, we'll start your training. Supper is at 6. Alone in her room, Willow unpacked her meager belongings. A few dresses, her mother's Bible, a silver hairbrush, and a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. The last item she pulled from her trunk was wrapped carefully in linen, a small bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon. She tucked them beneath her mattress without unwrapping them. By the next morning, Willow had settled into a routine that would define her days. Rising before dawn, she helped Eliza prepare breakfast for the boarders, currently a traveling salesman, an elderly schoolteacher waiting for the schoolhouse to be completed, and a young widow with her 10-year-old son. 2 weeks passed, and Willow began to breathe easier. The work was honest and satisfying. Eliza was kind, if somewhat reserved, and the boarders treated her with respect. Perhaps here, in this frontier town, her past would remain buried. On the first Saturday of September, Willow ventured to the mercantile to purchase supplies for the boarding house. The bell jangled cheerfully as she entered, and she smiled at the shopkeeper, a heavy-set man named Mr. Finch who had always been cordial in their previous interactions. "Good morning, Miss Jameson," he greeted. "What can I help you with today?" Willow consulted her list. "Flour, sugar, coffee, and perhaps some buttons for Mrs. Matthews. The ones on her Sunday dress are loose." As Mr. Finch gathered the items, the bell chimed again. 3 women entered, dressed in finery that seemed ostentatious for a morning of shopping. Willow recognized them as the wives of prominent townsmen, the banker, the mayor, and the owner of the largest cattle operation in the area. The women fell silent when they saw Willow, and then the whispers began. She kept her head high, focusing on her shopping, but their voices carried intentionally. "Did you hear about her past in St. Louis?" Mrs. Hargrove, the banker's wife, asked loudly. "Engaged to a respectable man's son until he discovered her indiscretions." Mrs. Pemberton, the mayor's wife, clicked her tongue. "The nerve, coming to a decent town like ours. As if we wouldn't find out." Willow's hands trembled as she counted out coins to pay Mr. Finch, who looked uncomfortably between her and the gossiping women. The bell above the door jangled again, and a tall figure entered, silencing the room with his presence. Quentin Erikson was not a man who went unnoticed. Standing well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a lean frame hardened by years of work under the unforgiving sun, he commanded attention without seeking it. His dark hair fell in waves to his collar, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. But it was his eyes that drew Willow's gaze, a startling blue that seemed to hold both ice and fire. He nodded briefly to Mr. Finch, and then turned his attention to the supplies he needed, seemingly oblivious to the tension in the store. Willow recognized him as one of the cowboys who worked at the Diamond Bar Ranch outside town. She had seen him ride through occasionally, though they had never spoken. "Mr. Erikson," Mrs. Pemberton called out sweetly, her tone transforming. "How lovely to see you in town. Will you be attending the harvest dance next weekend?" Quentin looked up, his expression neutral. "Hadn't planned on it, madam." "Oh, but you must," she insisted. "My niece will be visiting from Denver, and she would be delighted to meet a man of your capabilities." Willow gathered her purchases, eager to escape the store and the women's pointed remarks. As she turned to leave, Mrs. Hargrove's voice stopped her cold. "Miss Jameson, I'm surprised Eliza Matthews employed you, given your reputation. Does she know she's harboring a woman who's been used?" The store fell silent. Willow felt the blood drain from her face as the word hung in the air like a gunshot. She stood frozen, clutching her parcels, unable to find her voice. Quentin's deep voice cut through the silence. "Madam, I believe that's enough." Mrs. Hargrove turned to him, affronted. "Mr. Erikson, you can't possibly defend her. She's been used." Quentin interrupted, setting down a sack of coffee beans. He looked directly at Willow, and then at the 3 women. "If that's how you judge a person's worth, then I'll be proud to use my life loving someone who deserves it, instead of spreading poison through a decent town." The women gasped in unison. Willow stared at Quentin, stunned by the unexpected defense from a stranger. "Well, I never." Mrs. Pemberton sputtered. "Perhaps you should," Quentin replied evenly. He tipped his hat to Willow. "Miss, may I escort you back to the boarding house? I believe I've finished my business here." Without waiting for a response from the flabbergasted women, Quentin paid for his supplies, tucked them into a saddlebag, and held the door open for Willow. She walked through in a daze, her mind racing to understand what had just happened. They were halfway down the street before Willow found her voice. "Thank you, Mr. Erikson, but you shouldn't have done that. Now they'll talk about you too." Quentin shrugged, his stride easy beside her. "Let them. Words don't bother me much, Mississippi." "Jameson. Willow Jameson. Quentin Erikson." He tipped his hat again. "And I meant what I said in there. A person's worth isn't measured by the gossip that follows them." Willow looked at him curiously. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough to recognize cruelty when I see it," he replied simply. They reached the boarding house steps, and Willow turned to face him. "Why would you risk your reputation for a stranger?" Quentin's eyes held hers steadily. "My pa taught me that standing by while someone's being hurt is the same as doing the hurting yourself." He paused. "And truth be told, Miss Jameson, I've been watching you since you arrived in town. You work hard, treat folks kindly, and keep to yourself. Whatever happened before you came here isn't my business, but I recognize dignity when I see it." A flush rose to Willow's cheeks. "I don't know what to say." "No need to say anything." He gestured to the packages in her arms. "Need help with those?" "No, thank you. I can manage." Quentin nodded. "Well then, Miss Jameson, I wish you a good day." As he turned to leave, Willow called out, "Mr. Erikson?" He looked back, eyebrows raised in question. "The harvest dance. Will you be attending after all?" A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his serious features. "I believe I might, Miss Jameson. I believe I might." When Willow entered the boarding house, Eliza was waiting, her face drawn with concern. "I heard what happened at Finch's store," she said without preamble. "Word travels fast." Willow set down her packages on the kitchen table. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Matthews. I understand if you want me to leave." "Leave?" Eliza looked surprised. "Child, do you think I didn't know about your past when I invited you here? Your mother was my cousin, and we corresponded until her death. She wrote to me about the situation with the Blackwell boy." Willow's eyes widened. "You knew?" "All this time." Eliza nodded, busying herself with unpacking the supplies. Everyone deserves a second chance, especially when their only crime was trusting the wrong person. That Blackwell boy made promises he never intended to keep, and when you discovered his engagement to another woman, he spread lies to protect his reputation. Tears sprang to Willow's eyes. Most people believed him. Most people prefer scandal to truth, Eliza said dryly. "Now, what's this I hear about Quentin Erikson defending your honor?" Willow recounted the incident, her cheeks warming as she described Quentin's intervention. Eliza listened with growing amusement. Well, she said when Willow finished. "Quentin Erikson is not a man who involves himself in town matters often. He keeps to himself, works hard at the Diamond Bar, and has turned down more eligible young ladies than most men in these parts have met. He was just being kind," Willow insisted, though her heart beat a little faster at the memory of his smile. Eliza gave her a knowing look. "That man hasn't escorted anyone anywhere in the 3 years he's been in Sweetwater Creek. Kindness doesn't explain the look on his face when he walked out with you," according to Abigail Finch. The week passed in a blur of work and whispers. The incident at the Mercantile had sparked renewed gossip, but to Willow's surprise, not all of it was unkind. Several of the town's less prominent residents stopped by the boarding house with words of support or simply to introduce themselves properly. "Folks are taking sides," Eliza explained over dinner. "The Hargroves and Pembertons have influence, but they're not well liked. And Quentin Erikson standing up for you has made people curious. He's respected, even if he's not one for socializing." By Saturday, the day of the harvest dance, Willow had nearly convinced herself not to attend. "I'll just cause more gossip," she told Eliza as they prepared the evening meal for their boarders. "You'll cause more gossip by not going," Eliza countered. "Besides, you have a perfectly good dress, and I suspect a certain cowboy will be looking for you." The harvest dance was held in the newly completed schoolhouse, decorated with autumn leaves and lit with lanterns that cast a warm glow over the proceedings. When Willow entered, wearing her best dress of deep green wool with lace at the collar and cuffs, a hush fell over the nearest group of townspeople. She almost turned to flee when a firm hand touched her elbow. "Miss Jameson," Quentin's voice was low and reassuring. "You look lovely." Willow turned to find him standing beside her, dressed in clean dark trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a black vest. His hair was combed back, and his face clean-shaven, revealing a strong jaw and the slight cleft in his chin. "Mr. Erikson," she greeted, finding her voice. "I wasn't certain you'd come." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "I made a point of it." He offered his arm. "Would you care for some punch?" As they crossed the room, Willow was acutely aware of the stares following them. Quentin led her to the refreshment table, where he procured 2 cups of punch and then guided her to a relatively quiet corner. "Everyone is watching us," Willow murmured, sipping her drink nervously. "Let them," Quentin replied. "They'll find something new to talk about soon enough." The band struck up a lively tune, and several couples took to the floor. Quentin watched them for a moment, then set down his cup. "Would you care to dance, Miss Jameson?" Willow hesitated. "I'm not sure that's wise." "Wisdom is overrated," he said with a grin that transformed his serious features. "Besides, I came here specifically to dance with you." Her heart fluttered as she placed her hand in his. "Then I accept." Quentin led her onto the dance floor with confidence, his hand warm at her waist as they joined the other dancers. He moved with surprising grace for such a tall man, guiding her through the steps of the Virginia reel with ease. "You dance well for a cowboy," she observed as they circled each other. "My mother insisted all her sons learn," he replied. "Said no child of hers would shame her at social gatherings." "How many brothers do you have?" "3, all back east. I'm the only one who caught the Western fever." They danced 3 dances in succession before taking a break for refreshment. By then, the initial shock of their partnership had worn off, and the other dancers paid them less attention. "Tell me about yourself, Mr. Erikson," Willow said as they stood by an open window, catching the cool evening breeze. "What brought you to Sweetwater Creek?" Quentin gazed out at the stars for a moment before answering. "I was working a cattle drive from Texas. When we passed through here, I liked the look of the mountains. Figured I'd stay a season. Ended up staying 3 years. And before Texas? Everywhere and nowhere. Boston originally. My father was a banker who wanted his sons to follow in his footsteps. My brothers did. I joined the army instead, then drifted west after the war." Willow studied his profile in the lantern light. "You've seen a lot for someone so young." He chuckled. "I'm 28, Miss Jameson. Not so young anymore. Old enough to know better than to associate with a woman of questionable reputation," she said softly. Quentin turned to face her fully. "I judge people by what I see, not what I hear. And what I see is a woman of courage and dignity." The band struck up a waltz, slower and more intimate than the previous dances. Quentin held out his hand. "May I have this dance, Willow?" The use of her given name sent a shiver through her. "Yes, Quentin, you may." He led her back to the floor, his hand at her waist, drawing her closer than before. They moved together in perfect harmony, as if they had danced 100 times before. Willow was aware of Mrs. Hargrove and Mrs. Pemberton watching from the sidelines, their faces pinched with disapproval, but for the first time since arriving in Sweetwater Creek, she found she didn't care. "Would you tell me?" Quentin asked quietly as they turned. "About what happened in St. Louis. You don't have to, but I'd rather hear the truth from you than the gossip from them." Willow missed a step, and Quentin smoothly corrected their movement, giving her time to gather her thoughts. "I was engaged to a man named Theodore Blackwell," she began, her voice barely audible over the music. "The son of my father's business partner. After my parents died of influenza, I was alone, and Theodore offered marriage and security. I believed he loved me." Quentin's hand tightened slightly at her waist, encouraging her to continue. "We were intimate," she admitted, her cheeks burning. "He assured me our wedding was imminent, so I thought. I trusted him. Then I discovered he was already engaged to a banker's daughter in Chicago. When I confronted him, he denied everything we had shared and claimed I had tried to seduce him to trap him into marriage." "Coward," Quentin muttered. "His family had influence. Mine was gone. People believed him, and I became the fallen woman who tried to ruin a good man's reputation." She looked up at Quentin, searching his face for judgment. "That's the truth of it." Quentin's expression remained steady, his blue eyes holding hers without flinching. "Thank you for trusting me with that. You don't think less of me? I think more of you for surviving it with your spirit intact." The music ended, and Quentin reluctantly released her from his arms. Before they could speak further, Sheriff Mills approached them, his expression grim. "Miss Jameson, there's a situation at the boarding house. Nothing to worry about," he added quickly, seeing her alarmed expression. "Just a broken window. Some young troublemakers, most likely. Mrs. Matthews asked me to fetch you." Quentin's posture tensed. "I'll accompany Miss Jameson." The sheriff nodded, seeming relieved. "Probably wise. There's been some talk in town today, stirring up feelings." They left the dance immediately, Quentin keeping a protective hand at Willow's elbow as they walked quickly through the darkened streets. As they approached the boarding house, Willow gasped. One of the front windows had indeed been broken, and crude words had been painted across the white clapboard. "N.O. Fallen Women." Eliza stood on the porch, arms crossed, looking more angry than frightened. "Cowards," she spat when she saw Willow and Quentin, sneaking around in the dark instead of speaking their minds to my face. "Are you all right, Mrs. Matthews?" Quentin asked, surveying the damage. "Just fine, Mr. Erikson, though my opinion of certain townspeople has reached a new low." She looked at Willow's stricken face. "Now don't you start blaming yourself, child. This is the work of small minds and smaller hearts." Sheriff Mills examined the broken glass and the paint. "I have my suspicions about who might be responsible. The Hargrove boy and his friends have been causing trouble lately." "The apple doesn't fall far from the tree," Eliza muttered. "I'll board up the window tonight," Quentin offered, "and I'll return tomorrow with proper glass to fix it properly." "That's very kind, Mr. Erikson," Eliza said, giving him an appraising look. "But not necessary." I insist, he replied firmly. While Quentin and the sheriff gathered materials to secure the window, Willow helped Eliza clean up the broken glass inside the parlor. I should leave Sweetwater Creek, Willow said quietly. I'm only bringing trouble to your door. Eliza straightened, hands on her hips. Willow Jameson, I have lived in this town for 20 years. I buried my husband here. I've seen good times and bad, and I will not be driven out of my home by ignorance and spite. Neither will you. But no buts. You have done nothing wrong, and I won't have you punishing yourself for other people's cruelty. Outside, they could hear Quentin hammering boards across the broken window. The steady rhythm was somehow reassuring, a counterpoint to the chaos of the evening. That young man, Eliza said, nodding toward the sound, sees what I see in you. Don't throw away a chance at happiness because of fear. After the window was secured and the sheriff had departed with promises to investigate, Quentin stood awkwardly in the parlor, his hat in his hands. Thank you, Mr. Erikson, Eliza said warmly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm an old woman who needs her rest. With a pointed look at Willow, she retreated upstairs, leaving them alone. I'm sorry your evening was ruined, Quentin said softly. It wasn't ruined, Willow replied. The dance was wonderful. He took a step closer. Willow, I meant what I said at Finch's store. I don't care what happened before you came here. I care about who you are now, and I'd like the chance to know you better. Her heart pounded. What are you saying, Quentin? I'm saying that I'd like to call on you properly. Take you for drives. Bring you flowers. Court you, if you'll allow it. People will talk. People always talk. I'm more interested in what you have to say. Willow looked up at him. This man who had defended her without knowing her, who had danced with her in front of the entire town, who had come to her aid without hesitation. Yes, she said simply. I'd like that very much. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Then I'll see you tomorrow, to fix that window. The following weeks transformed Willow's life in Sweetwater Creek. True to his word, Quentin called on her regularly. On Sundays after church, they took drives in his wagon through the golden aspen groves. On Wednesday evenings, he would join her and Eliza for dinner, bringing small gifts, wildflowers, a book of poetry, once a kitten he'd rescued from a barn at the Diamond Bar. The town's reaction was mixed. Some, like Mrs. Hargrove and Mrs. Pemberton, maintained their disapproval, crossing the street to avoid Willow. Others, seeing Quentin's steady devotion and Eliza's unwavering support, began to reconsider their initial judgments. It's like watching ice melt, Eliza observed as they prepared Sunday dinner in late October. Slowly at first, then all at once. Indeed, more people were nodding to Willow on the street, stopping to chat at the mercantile, or calling greetings from across the way. The word, used, was no longer whispered as she passed, though she knew the gossip hadn't entirely died. Quentin seemed oblivious to the town's evolving opinion. He continued his courtship with single-minded determination, his feelings growing more evident with each passing day. For Willow, who had once believed herself incapable of trusting again, the steady warmth of his affection was healing wounds she hadn't known were still open. On a crisp November afternoon, Quentin took her riding along the creek that gave the town its name. The water sparkled in the sunlight, and the last of the aspen leaves fluttered like gold coins in the breeze. They stopped in a small clearing to rest the horses and share the lunch Willow had packed. I received a letter from my foreman today, Quentin said as they sat on a fallen log. He's offering me a partnership in the ranch. Willow looked at him in surprise. That's wonderful news. Quentin nodded, his expression serious. It would mean putting down roots here permanently. Building a life. Isn't that what you want? She asked, suddenly uncertain. He took her hand in his. What I want, Willow Jameson, is to build that life with you. Her breath caught as he dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hand in his. I know it hasn't been long, he continued, but I've never been more certain of anything. I love your strength, your kindness, your dignity. I love the way you hum when you think no one is listening, and how you always make sure Eliza's tea is exactly the way she likes it. I love everything about you, and I want to spend my life showing you just how much. Tears filled Willow's eyes. Quentin, I'm not Theodore Blackwell, he said softly. I won't make promises I don't intend to keep. When I say I want to marry you, I mean it with every fiber of my being. What about the gossip? The judgment? She whispered. Let them judge. I meant what I said that day in the store. I'll be proud to use my life loving you, Willow. Every day, for as long as we both live. Willow looked into his earnest blue eyes, so full of love and certainty, and felt the last of her fears melt away. Yes, she said, her voice growing stronger. Yes, Quentin Erikson, I will marry you. His smile outshone the sun as he slipped a simple silver ring onto her finger. It was my grandmother's, he explained. My mother sent it when I wrote to her about you. You wrote to your mother about me? I wrote to everyone about you, he admitted with a sheepish grin. My brothers think I've gone mad, falling in love so quickly. And have you? Gone mad? She teased, even as her heart soared at his words. Madly in love, he confirmed, rising to pull her into his arms. His kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. The news of their engagement spread through Sweetwater Creek like wildfire. Eliza was delighted, immediately offering to host the wedding at the boarding house. To Willow's surprise, many of the townspeople called to offer congratulations, including Mr. Finch, who presented them with a fine set of china as an engagement gift. Seems your cowboy's respect runs deep in this town, Eliza observed. And folks are coming around to seeing you as he does. Not everyone was pleased, of course. Mrs. Hargrove made a point of announcing that she and her family would not attend such an unsuitable union. Mrs. Pemberton followed suit, though her husband, the mayor, privately told Quentin that he wished them well. Their loss, Quentin said when Willow related the snubs. Our wedding will be happier without them. They were married on Christmas Eve, 1876, in the boarding house parlor, with the window now repaired and festooned with evergreen boughs and red ribbons. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, attended by Eliza, Quentin's foreman, and several cowboys from the Diamond Bar, and a surprising number of townspeople who had gradually come to accept Willow as one of their own. Sheriff Mills performed the ceremony, his normally gruff voice softening as he pronounced them husband and wife. When Quentin kissed his bride, the small gathering erupted in cheers. Mrs. Erikson, Quentin whispered against her lips. My wife. My husband, she replied, joy making her voice tremble. Their life together began in a small cabin on the Diamond Bar Ranch, which Quentin had spent weeks preparing for his bride. It was simple but comfortable, with a stone fireplace, sturdy furniture, and windows that looked out over the valley toward the mountains. As winter settled over Sweetwater Creek, Willow and Quentin established the rhythms of their shared life. He rode out each day to work the ranch, returning each evening to find her waiting, their home warm and welcoming. Sometimes he brought her wildflowers that had somehow survived the frost, or interesting stones he'd found along the creek. She learned to bake his favorite apple pie and mend his shirts so the seams would hold through long days in the saddle. In the evenings, they would sit before the fire, talking of their day, their dreams, their future. Sometimes he would read aloud from one of her books while she sewed, his deep voice bringing the words to life. Other times they would simply sit in companionable silence, marveling at the contentment they had found together. I never thought I'd have this, Willow confessed one snowy night as they lay entwined in their bed. After Theodore, I believed love was forever closed to me. Quentin traced the curve of her cheek with gentle fingers. And I never thought I'd want to stay in one place, with one person, for the rest of my life. Until I saw you step off that stagecoach. You saw me arrive? You never told me that. He smiled in the darkness. I was picking up supplies for the ranch. Saw this beautiful woman with sad eyes, and something just stopped inside me. I asked around town, found out who you were, where you were working. Rode past the boarding house more times than was strictly necessary, hoping to catch a glimpse of you. Willow laughed softly. And I thought our first meeting was at Finch's store. That was just the first time I found the courage to speak to you, he admitted. Or rather, the situation demanded that I speak. She nestled closer against his chest. Thank you for defending me that day. I'd do it again. Every day for the rest of our lives if needed. As winter gave way to spring, and spring to summer, the whispers about Willow's past faded into the background of town gossip, replaced by newer, more interesting tales. Her marriage to Quentin had given her a place in the community that even Mrs. Hargrove's disapproval couldn't undermine. Willow continued to help Eliza at the boarding house several days a week and gradually became involved in other aspects of town life. She joined the Ladies' Aid Society, helped organize the summer picnic, and even taught reading to some of the ranch hands who had never had the opportunity to learn. By the following Christmas, as they celebrated their first anniversary, Willow had news that completed her joy. A baby, Quentin whispered in wonder, his hand gently resting on her still flat stomach. Our child. Due in early summer, she confirmed, her eyes shining. Are you happy? Happy doesn't begin to describe it. He gathered her in his arms, his voice thick with emotion. I love you, Willow Erikson. More than I ever thought possible. And I love you. She replied, her heart full to bursting. My defender, my husband, my heart. In July of 1878, Willow gave birth to a daughter they named Hope, a testament to the future they had built from the ashes of judgment and pain. As Quentin held his infant daughter, gazing down at her with wonder and fierce love, Willow remembered the words that had changed the course of her life. Then I'll be proud to use my life loving you, he had said that day in Finch's store, defending a woman he barely knew against the cruelty of gossip and judgment. And he had kept that promise, using every day to show her the depth and breadth of his love, healing the wounds of her past with the steadfast devotion of his heart. In Sweetwater Creek, Colorado, Willow Jameson Erikson had found not just a new beginning, but a love story that would define her life not by what she had lost, but by all she had gained in the arms of a cowboy brave enough to stand against the tide of whispers and proud enough to proclaim his love for a woman the world had tried to discard.